Good evening, Andy.
Good evening to you, Jane. Lovely to be with you in Wolverhampton North East.
No, thank you so much for coming, and welcome to everyone who's watching and has registered for the event this evening. I think it's great that you're here to answer questions from my constituents about Wolverhampton and the wider West Midlands. I'm going to kick off by asking a couple of points that many people have raised with me when they knew the event was coming up. And the first big one is Greenbelt. So Wentzfield North, in Bushbury North, we've got Linthouse Lane, Cat and Kittens Lane. We really need to protect our green spaces. So I am very excited the National Brownfield Institute's coming to town, and Mhclg, all of those fabulous good news stories. But what are you going to do as our West Midlands Mayor to protect our Greenbelt?
Well, great question, Jane. Thank you. Can I just say, first of all, it's lovely to be with your residents and to make myself available. As some of you will know, because I've done these out and about over the last 4 years, in person till a year ago. I'm sorry we can't do it in person. Everyone understands that. But I hope this is some way of fulfilling my commitment to be available to people for their questions. I could probably have anticipated the first question, but as we go through the evening, it's all spontaneous. I don't know what's going to be asked, so I have that bit of trepidation. But please do put your questions in, because it'd be lovely to hear whatever anyone's interested in. But on Greenbelt, this is a really, I know it's important to you, Jane. You've marched me to Linthouse Lane, and you've actually stood there with me and taken the photographs and said, you dare. So you've been utterly consistent over this, and I hope I have been too. So 12 months ago, we gave what we call our Greenbelt pledge for the Black Country, and it's very simple. I do not believe we need to build on a single bit of Greenbelt round Wolverhampton, Franklin, Dudley, Walsall as well, actually, in order to meet the housing needs we have for the whole conurbation. So this is no sort of NIMBYism on my part. We have to build the homes, and the great news is we are doing so. We've actually doubled the number of homes that we are building from 8,000 to over 16,000 a year, but we're doing it nearly all on brownfield sites. Hence the commitment that we will not build on the places in Wentzfield North and Bushbury North that you've pointed me to. And of course, the way we've managed to do this has been to get funding from government, our brownfield funds that we then use with private sector developers to clean up the places. And then, of course, they're able to develop them into new homes. And the lovely thing is, Wolverhampton has our very first scheme called Steelhouse Lane, just not quite in your patch, it's in Stuart's patch. But I was there a few weeks ago to do a little film, and there are already residents in their homes. And I stood there and I thought, you wouldn't be behind that door if we hadn't done that financial deal. So it's a lovely feeling, actually.
Great. No, I think that's a really encouraging answer. And I know we're seeking to meet with South Staffs and liaise with Gavin over the border and work constructively so that we can really make an effort to protect that space. I know a lot of people are very worried about it. I should have done some housekeeping, which I completely forgot to do, so I'm very sorry. If anyone listening wants to ask a question, if you can put it in the chat box, someone's picking that up. I won't be able to read the chat box, but I am able to read another stream that's coming through. Someone's going to pass on your questions. If you don't get your question answered, if we do run out of time, please send it through to an email address that's going to be put in the chat function, and Andy or his team, they will get back to you with any further questions. So I think that's really important. Another question, and I've got to read the questions at some point. Okay, before I bring in my first question from a member of the public, I also want to just ask about infrastructure across the region and transport links. And can you tell us a little bit more about your vision for Wolverhampton's place in your West Midlands vision of transport? I know it's something that's so important to you to sort of leave a legacy of fantastic public transport. So where does Wolverhampton, how's this going to help people in Wolverhampton North East?
Yeah, it's a very important question, and I hope you won't. This is a slightly bonkers first reflection on it. When you think of the role of the mayor, I do think you think about transport, actually. Do you think of Ken Livingstone? He was totally different party to me, but I do have some respect for him, actually, that he sort of established the role of the mayor in London, and he was all about transport. That was just about the only thing he did in his first term. So it is very important. And so I hope people would feel we've made some good progress in the first term, but there's a lot more to do. So let's just go through what's happened and then a word about why it's so important. Of course, right at the centre of the city is rail. So one of the very first decisions we took was the investment in Wolverhampton main railway station, because it was not a graceful arrival in the city. It sold the city short and really poor. And I don't regret in any way putting in a very large sum of money, £50 million for the regeneration of the station. It's actually going to be completed this week. And I honestly think it is now an appropriate arrival at a dynamic city. So that was very important. We've obviously had the success continuing on rail, with the money for the reopening of the Walsall to Wolverhampton railway. So it doesn't actually stop in your patch, Jane, but for your main railway station, new stations on the Walsall-Wolverhampton line, and then we'll be able in time to connect out from Walsall through to Sutton, round back into Birmingham City Centre on the Sutton Park line. So that's great as well. And the next big target for rail investment in Wolverhampton is the opening of the station in your patch between Penderford and Aldersley up there, just literally the boundary of your constituency. Yep. So that's an important commuting station there on the Shrewsbury line. And so that will both be, if you want to go west, you can, but if you want to come into the city centre in Wolverhampton, then on into the network, for example, into Birmingham, that's important for your constituents there. So big investment in rail. Metro, of course, we've made a huge investment in the Metro extension through the rest of the Black Country down from Wednesbury into Dudley. And of course, that gives citizens in Wolverhampton, where it will connect up with the station, the opportunity to travel to those other venues in the Black Country. But the next manifesto, our transport map for 2040, has two particular Metro extensions for your patch, which I think are very interesting. One to Oxley, basically along the Stafford Road, and one to New Cross. Which obviously is the huge public transport destination. So two things we really want to try to get done. And I mean, I do think linking to our hospitals is really critical, actually. So I hope we can do that. And then other smaller pieces, we're launching the bike share scheme. That's just happened in Wolverhampton, of course. So that's exciting. And the other piece that I am very, very keen to get done in Wolverhampton is just the reflection on buses. And, you know, people think that's the lifeblood of public transport in Wolverhampton. What we've done around bus fares to hold them flat for 4 years and increase ridership, no other area of the country done that. And of course, put clean buses in. That's also been really important as well. If you think of the platinum buses, beautiful they are. So I think we've got lots of investment, but particularly if people want to give their feedback in the chat, they can. I'm particularly interested in the Metro extensions to Oxley and New Cross.
I think they will be. I'd be very keen to get some really solid public opinion on those. And I know buses is something that is regularly raised with me. And as an electric car driver, I did tell Minister Chris Heaton-Harris, I did tell him we had bus envy at Coventry. And I put in an early bid to say I would very much like to see Wolverhampton get a good load of electric buses.
Well, let me just build on that, because you're very beady-eyed, because yesterday we had the Prime Minister in Coventry, because I know it's not Wolverhampton and I'm going to get slated for this, but we had the electric city competition, and Transport for the West Midlands, which obviously I'm responsible for, bid on behalf of Coventry, and it was very much about a self-contained city, much harder for the Black Country. But we did scoop the pot, £50 million. The PM was there yesterday to celebrate it. Every new bus in Coventry electric. Now that's brilliant. But the next competition will be over hydrogen. And it's very interesting whether hydrogen is the future or electric is the future, actually. And I think we will be able to develop a proposal with National Express for hydrogen. So it doesn't have to be electric, actually. But the point that I have seen flash across the chat, and like Jane, I can't keep up with all the chat about pleasing buses, we are trying to do that. And critically, we drove, before the pandemic, we were driving up usage of our buses. 8 million more journeys in buses in the year before the pandemic struck. And it's so important because it's a way of dealing with congestion, dealing with climate change, And the whole investment in public transport is about how the economy works, really. It's about getting people to jobs, to leisure, to all those things. So really important for us. So clear commitment to continue investing, Jane.
Absolutely. And that brings me on. Before I start, I've got some brilliant questions come in the WhatsApp that we've got. The economy is such a key thing as we recover from the pandemic. Our economic future in Wolverhampton, which had really high unemployment before the pandemic. So I absolutely am with you that it's getting those public transport links to connect people to jobs, connect people to opportunities. That's why I kind of like the idea of a metro to the I-54 up the Stafford Road. I think that's such a key employment venue for Wolverhampton. So I think that's a really interesting proposal. But I think I'd like to ask you, what, as a West Midlands mayor, are your plans to really boost our economy and get it moving and restarted after the pandemic?
Well, with pleasure. It's such an important question. Probably worth just giving a bit of context about what happened and both before the pandemic, during, and then now what we're going to do. So I know there were still challenges in Wolverhampton, no one's questioning that. But actually the facts are that in the 3 years running up to the pandemic, 97,000 more jobs created in our part of the West Midlands. Great progress. And actually we had a record level of employment. However, what's happened in the pandemic is we've had a horrible bash, and we now find ourselves having lost about 95,000 jobs. So I give those two numbers because you can all see the symmetry straight away. So there is an enormous job to be done to build back our economy. And if you want to see all the detail, we've got a plan is the key thing. I call it the Mayor's Jobs Plan. Anyone wants to see it, we can put the link to it in the chat, please, Cameron, so you can have a look at the detail. And it said, where are we going to find 100,000 new jobs? Not in some fantasy that the government's going to give us a load of money, but what can we see here and now for investment in sectors that are going to grow, and of course in retraining opportunities. So let's just I won't go through everything, but all the details everyone wants to see. But just a few of the headlines. First of all, let's think about the sectors that were growing brilliantly before the pandemic. And construction was actually the fastest growing sector of all. So what we're looking at there, of course, is the housing sector being revived. Brownfield Institute is critical. Mhclg coming to Wolverhampton, 500 jobs. I lobbied away there. But that's about the brains of that housing and regeneration industry being here. And of course, in the budget, we also got news of new money for what they call this modern methods of construction thinking piece in Wolverhampton as well. So brilliant that Wolverhampton was called out for that as well. And I think that will be a big thing for us in the future. Can we secure factories to do that? Then the second area, of course, so important for Wolverhampton businesses is this whole issue of green growth back, and particularly the electrification of the automotive industry. So many of your companies are in that sector. And just to give you a really specific example of this, we launched with Wolverhampton College just 2 weeks ago, the new facility for 700 new places there around training for electric vehicle maintenance. That for the whole facility across the conurbation. Again, and the college is in your patch, Jane, isn't it? If I think about that correctly. Or is it in South East?
It's Pat. It's just.
Oh, I'm wrong. Never mind. It's very close to you.
But I visited them and they do fantastic training there, actually. It's really good to see.
But what was interesting to me was that we saw because we're funding it, we saw the opportunity with them of a growth sector where we get, as I say, 700 jobs in that sector. And then, of course, there's the whole issue of the growth in the health and life sciences piece. And again, the work we're doing there for new jobs to be created in that sector. Some of it around the sort of clever digital health, the research, but a lot of it actually around the caring jobs as well. So you see, we've pulled out a number of things there, but the fact is there is a plan for that 100,000 new jobs. And that's what I feel it's very important that we know exactly how we're going to achieve that.
No, I think it's great. I know that Cameron, you put the link in the chat if anyone would like to go and watch. And I did watch it, and I thought it was a great sort of grounding for a recovery, which is so important. And I share your absolute enthusiasm about all this construction and architecture and that whole building industry over the coming decades. I think it really puts our city on the map, and I'm very excited about it. It gives so many jobs at all levels, so much research and development, retrofitting, innovation. I think it's great news. So if anyone
just let me jump in again, Jane, because we've not really said this, and then I will let residents ask their questions. But you and I have been working on this together, and we perhaps take it for granted. But this idea of the Brownfield Institute, when we first started talking about this, the whole idea was there was something that Wolverhampton was really nationally famous for and led in. So we're doing all this regeneration of sites. One of your brilliant reclamation companies, Mhclg, there in Bilston, you know, nationally famous. But we wanted a sort of brains of something which Wolverhampton could lead the country. And we've now got it. And I am absolutely certain that we'll grow something out of this. And it's brilliant that the ground has literally been broken today for the building of that facility at Springfield in your constituency. So it's genuinely exciting that that's of national significance in your city.
It is, and then we welcome a new ministry. So
exactly.
I'm really hopeful. This is our, you know, selling point. This is our key way to get our unemployment down in Wolverhampton. Okay, I'm going to turn to some of these fantastic questions. This is from Paul. The Leasehold Knowledge Partnership have proposed a viable financing model to address the building safety crisis that does not expose taxpayers or leaseholders to remediation costs. Why is the government pursuing the loans model? And I think,
okay,
would you
so fascinating, because one or two people on the call might think, what's this all about? So this is about the cladding scandal. And I don't know if you know this, Paul, but I've been very heavily involved with Mhclg. And actually, we've not had that many buildings in Wolverhampton come forward so far, actually, Jane. It tends to have been a central Birmingham issue, interestingly. And I am sort of with you, Paul, that I do have huge respect for the fact the government have found £3.5 billion more to address this. But I don't believe they have really been as imaginative as they should have been about some of the ways this needs to be solved. Because it's not just about cladding. There's a lot of other building safety issues. There's a whole debate about how we're pursuing the original development faults and construction faults. And there's definitely a piece about how the insurance industry's got to contribute to this as well. And at the moment, the leaseholders are being exposed for too much. It's a very topical question because I've literally signed off a letter today to the Housing Secretary about this thing, saying we need more detailed work on alternative schemes. So if you wanted, again, to ping in the chat your proposal, I've got one of my team who look at the detail of this. We would like to take that forward. I don't know if you know this, Paul. Mhclg have got a special advisor just looking at this. He's a very resourceful man, actually. And if you ping it through, I will willingly feed some of this through because I genuinely think that there needs to be more lateral thinking about this, just as you're implying.
Yeah, and if I can just add, Andy, I sit on the Fire Safety APPG.
Oh, yeah.
We're also feeding in, and the fire service, lots of people are still working on this. I know it's concerning, not particularly in Wolverhampton, but I have had people contact me who have property in Birmingham that is affected. So, you know, it's a very difficult situation, but it's ongoing. And thanks for your input on that. A question from Warren. What dialogue have you had with South Staffordshire on the release of Greenbelt? We're back to Greenbelt for Wolverhampton's housing need. Do you agree now is not the time with the launch of your task force to regenerate public land? I
think I know what the question means. It's not literally as you've read it out, Jane. So maybe just slightly there. So South Staffordshire, we have been very clear, particularly let's take 7 cornfields on the other side of the city, that they should not be doing what they call these sustainable urban extensions on the edge of the city, because frankly, they're not sustainable. That's the whole point. They're taking Greenbelt on what can be a worse contribution to the climate change crisis than developing on our precious Greenbelt. So that position has been made very clear to a number of adjoining authorities. And I think your question, though, about the Public Land Task Force, in a sense, goes back to my key point. We're trying to do whatever we can to secure land that could be developed for housing within the conurbation, and indeed in brownfield sites in the adjoining authorities as well. There's some, for example, in Shropshire, they've been very creative about some of their old industrial sites, military sites, for example. But we should be looking at those public land sites bringing them back into use, and of course assembling land together into bigger packages so we can develop it. And that's what the Public Land Task Force that you're referring to is trying to do. So I would be saying to those areas adjoining the city's boundary that they certainly should not be developed. And yes, you are right, the Public Land Task Force is one of the reasons we should be saying we're doing more on brownfield.
Fantastic. And I think you've been such a champion, Andy, of innovation, of city centre living, of this modern methods of construction task force that we've got coming. I have been worried as a local MP that we are putting the cart before the horse a little bit with these quotas being fulfilled before just as we're embarking on such exciting progress in brownfield reclamation. So I know it's something we will continue to work on, because it's really important to me. It's really important to people in Wolverhampton. So thank you for your...
Can I just say one more thing about it, Jane? Because I think this might spark a different question as well. There's also this whole issue that if we can bring more people living near the city centre, it will drive custom to the city centre, which is such a critical issue as well. And if you think of the amount of space around the city centre that is still vacant, I mean, okay, we've begun to make great progress. It's good to see the Royal Hospital site. It's good to see Springfield. It's good to see Steelhouse Lane. We've got the commitment on Colwell Street around Brewer's Yard, as we call it, all those sites, but there are still vast tracts. Think of all that canal side land. And we have also got to think as a modern, growing, vibrant city about how we make some denser developments as well around the city centre. So much to be done, really.
Absolutely. No, I support that, absolutely. And I think it will really sustain a city centre that we have seen decline for a very long time. So thank you for that. A question from Louise. I know money has been allocated to Wentzfield and Bilston. I think that's Towns Fund money. But what can be done to improve Oxley and the 3 tons area? So many shops are now empty. Others look a mess. We need landlords to tidy up the area and businesses to take pride in the area. Before I bring you in, Andy, I'm just going to say I did drag Andy to 3 tons. And I'm very pleased. I will be opening a new supermarket there in a couple of weeks, which I'm very much looking forward to cutting a ribbon. And I've also had a meeting with the landlord of that particular block. So that's a more local issue. But
well, I have to tell you, sorry, I forgot the name of the question. Just say again.
Louise.
Louise, I have to tell you, Louise, your MP has been very hot on this. She marched me around the 3 tons one Saturday, I think it was before Christmas actually, and we went in the furniture there. It was great. And I mean, it's fascinating because actually there's still a lot of strength in Oxley there. If you think of on both sides of the road. So the short-term thing that needs to be done is the landlord needs a good talking with actually, because he's not investing in what is actually a really precious facility. So I'm sure Jane will do her bit there, but if need be, I would be very willing to add my voice. But the other thing that needs to be said is there's a big challenge, isn't there, about how the road works there, splitting the 2 sides off. If we are successful in thinking about public transport there, it will need to be an opportunity to remodel the whole piece. And I actually think that's the longer term answer. But in the short term, Jane's absolutely right. It's the chat with the landlord about, frankly, what are not hugely expensive, but cosmetic improvements which would give a very different feel to the place.
Yes, and I think
actually just one other thought, Jane. There's another very interesting reflection on the back of the pandemic, isn't there, about how some local centres are really actually thriving because people don't want to make a longer journey, and we've seen that. I mean, it's getting spit out of your patch, Jane, but Tettenhall is very interesting. I was walking around there recently as well, and it's actually really thrived in the pandemic. And I think it's got some advantages in terms of layout over Oxley, as we've just said, but there is something about local traders really giving distinction to an immediate high street, which you see there. You see it in Wentzfield as well, actually, really clearly. So I do think there's an opportunity there if we can encourage some more real, genuine local traders in on the back of that sort of feeling of support localities on the back of COVID.
Absolutely, and we talked about this when you visited 3 tons. There are some fantastic independent businesses based all around that whole junction and down the Stafford Road, and it's just making the area, as you say, a nicer place to visit, and really regenerating. I will keep going. I've got a meeting with the council about the Levelling Up Fund, and 3 tonnes is one of the areas I'm going to be raising there
Good
as
for
well.
you.
So another question from Caroline. Has the rush to deliver new housing and adopt new methods of construction compromised building safety? To what extent do you feel you've been successful in improving the quality and standard of house building in the West Midlands? And a sneaky third one, will the building safety crisis have a negative impact on the economic growth potential of the West Midlands? There's a lot of questions.
There's a lot in there, Caroline. So actually, I do not think that our move towards growth, and as I say, doubling the number of homes, has compromised quality. I will actually say at all. And I guess the first thing to say about that, it's not quite the quality issue, but I think you'll be interested in it. Any project that we invest in, we insist in a minimum of 20% affordable. So actually this whole issue of just with growth, are we marking people out of the market? Categorically not. I'm very, very proud of the fact we've absolutely stuck to that, and no development of the West Midlands has had any of that funding I talked about earlier without hitting that 20% affordable. What we've also done is set our design charter on the pure quality piece. It is not legally enforceable yet in Wolverhampton because it hasn't been adopted by Wolverhampton as planning guidance, but we are sort of doing it by voluntary collaboration, and it talks about sustainability criteria, greening criteria. So again, I think I can look you straight in the eye if I could see you and say no compromise at all. If anything, we've tried to use the sort of power we have to convene to try to improve standards, actually. And if I look at some of the developments that we funded, it's not in Wolverhampton, but one I'm absolutely fascinated by, Portloop, which is all in Birmingham, which is all modern methods of construction, the way in which they have communal gardens all facing in together in a relatively dense development, very close to Birmingham City Centre, is actually, I think, a brilliant standard to look to, actually. So on the contrary from your question, actually, in terms of the question about will the cladding scandal slow the rate of economic development? Now, there is definitely an issue here at a sort of local level, that actually a lot of money is frankly being wasted by residents in those blocks that are subject to this, whether it be on waking watches, on huge insurance bills, and it means they have less spending power. So in that sense, categorically, yes, I'm afraid it is having a really bad economic effect on those immediately caught up. I think it would be, to be very honest, Caroline, it'd be a stretch to say that's, you know, having a big effect in total across the region, but it's an absolute tragedy for those individuals caught up in it. And to Paul's earlier question, there is definitely still a debate, as Jane acknowledged, between how much the leaseholder bears and how much others bear, including the state.
Absolutely, thanks, Andy. Question from Ab. I'm leaving out people's surnames, but this one I shall fess up. It's Jay Singh Sahal, who's our candidate for Police and Crime Commissioner.
Oh yes,
so
good.
It's someone you know very well. As you know, I'm campaigning to stop police station closures, including Mhclg. My question is, will you continue to speak to the current PCC on behalf of concerned residents about the need for our local community to maintain our police station, which is necessary to get that police presence to tackle rising local crime?
Well, it's nice you get a question when you can give a one-word answer to, isn't it? Because the answer is categorically yes, of course I will. And I do appreciate there is huge local feeling about Wednesfield Police Station. I think Jane you kicked off a petition, and I think the response in Wednesfield was overwhelming about this. So we know what local citizens feel about this. Now, interestingly, because the question is, what am I doing? The current Labour PCC tried to pin this on me recently. It was quite a clever political wheeze, but it was absolute nonsense, because let's be really clear. The only reason that police stations are closing is that the Labour PCC has proposed it. And 44 police stations across the West Midlands have been closed in the 9 years since we've had a Labour PCC. 44 police stations. And so we've lost many already. Actually, it's our big police stations like Wednesfield that are left. and we have to defend them. And the reason for that is they are, in a sense, the heart of community policing. And I'm a huge believer that great community policing, of course, does all the local stuff, makes people feel safe, all of that's so important just at the moment, but it is also the front line of what can turn into be much, much more serious crime. So we have to support those community establishments. And so, yeah, I will continue to battle with the existing PCC in the 7 weeks we've got left in our respective roles. And then hopefully we will have Jay, who's given a categoric assurance that he will halt the closures and review all of the proposed police station closures, decide what to do.
Absolutely, and it was really popular petition. People want that local police presence, visible officers on patrol, and I'm really pleased Jay is prioritising those common sense answers to local policing. Where am I? A question from Lorraine. Affordable housing is normally associated with people getting onto the property ladder. For people already on the property ladder, how do you propose to make sure the right affordable homes are available to them as well as people move up and down the ladder and their life circumstances change? Good question.
So I didn't know this question was coming, otherwise I probably wouldn't have said what I did to the question 2 ago. So there we are, that proves the spontaneity of it. As I already said, we have done good work in committing to this 20% affordable. But to answer your question, Ray, I want to tell you about something else, which I also think has been significant, that we have, and this is going to sound a bit technical, so bear with me, I will explain how it's very relevant. We've also changed the definition of affordable to make it much more directly relevant to people's lives. The national definition of affordable relates it to the value of a property. So if the value of a property, average property goes up from 200 to 250,000, the definition of affordable also goes up, even though people's wages haven't increased at all. And actually all that's happening is affordable is becoming more out of reach. We've said in the West Midlands, and the capital we've committed is dictated by this definition, we're going to make affordable related to people's actual pay. And we say whether you be renting or buying, the cost should be no more than roughly a third of the income of someone on a fairly normal salary. So whether you're as a starting nurse or police officer, something like that. And I honestly think that that is absolutely critical. So when you look at a development like Silas Lane, I've talked about, when we do the other developments we've talked about, when we look at the marches, which is going to become something, a very exciting scheme that we're going to talk about in the next few days, that definition of affordable is that new one. And honestly, Lorraine, I think that is connecting with people's actual lives, not a theoretical definition of what people can afford, in a way which I'm actually very proud that we've made that change, and that sticks across all 7 local authorities of the West Midlands.
I think that's such a common sense answer, and I'm so pleased, because affordable, I know if it relates to property prices, certainly in central Birmingham, in London, it's crazy money to anyone on an average salary. So I really appreciate that redefinition of affordable. A question from Alex. The new gigafactory is in Greenbelt land, yet it's brownfield site. How will the raw materials get to the gigafactory? Oh, I like this bit. Wouldn't the JLR site in Wolverhampton have made more sense?
Oh, Alex, you monkey, you can't commit the JLR sites to that. Then we want that to be a huge successful part of JLR going forward. There's a very serious question behind what you say. We did look across all of the West Midlands for a site for this gigafactory, because obviously the gigafactory is going to support all of the West Midlands automotive industry, actually. And there was a very short list of places that had the size, the electrical connections, and actually the logistics, coming to your question of how stuff gets in and out, that were appropriate. And of course, your point is absolutely right. For a bizarre reason, a tarmacked airport runway is technically in the Greenbelt. Please, I don't know why, but it is already a developed area, so that was appropriate. But I have to tell you, the whole of the region has come together to back this bid. And I frankly would not have wanted a conversation with JLR about repurposing their incredible facility at Wolverhampton, that has got to have a critical role in their future, as it has done for the last few years, obviously. So that's why we went for a new facility in Coventry. But your question is brilliant, because it serves all of the industry. And let's be clear about this. It also serves all the manufacturers who are supplying automotive companies, because their future depends on this electrified industry. So if you are an automotive parts supplier in a part of Wolverhampton or anywhere else in the Black Country, whether you be Aliacast or an organisation like that, or any of those companies, you will be benefiting from this factory indirectly. And that was such an important point.
Great, thank you, Andy. Question from Caroline. Do you have any plans for the canal areas that maybe could be another Brindley Place? I love that question, because I've got beautiful basin down by the station going towards the Brownfield Institute.
Yes, but I'm going to be found out here. There isn't a specific proposal yet for Wolverhampton Canal side, which, apart from one thing which I'll come back to. But just to acknowledge, we understand the point. There'll be an announcement later this week of canal side development in the middle of Walsall on their basin. So it proves and again, it's WMCA funding going in. So it proves the point. We get the fact this can be a real model to drive development. When I said earlier on, though, there's huge opportunity for redevelopment still in Wolverhampton. Canal side was the area I had in mind. So absolutely, we need to, putting it bluntly, we need to work with the City Council. We've got to make more progress than we have thus far. We've not been fast enough. This is definitely a huge opportunity for investment in Wolverhampton, but being entirely straight with you, because I don't want to overclaim, we have not yet done a deal for that investment on that canal side, but it's got to be just, I mean, it should be the most sought after new residential site in Wolverhampton, shouldn't it? It should be really beautiful. So we get that, and that needs to be a feature of the coming term, really.
Absolutely. No, I think celebrating our canals is brilliant. You know, we're proud of our industrial heritage, and I think that's why Robert Jenrick so liked the School of Architecture when we toured around there.
Absolutely.
It was preserving that heritage, but also bringing in the modern and making it a really impressive place. Jay, is the metro coming through to Wentzfield, then on to Willenhall and onwards for more public trade to help the retail sector?
So, not concluded. On our draft transport map, all we have is it concluding at New Cross. But you would be right in saying that if we're going to New Cross, there's obviously a debate there about exactly how that is done. But there isn't an exact line proposal at the moment. What we have, no, it's not relevant. I was going to say, obviously, we've committed to the heavy rail, but that doesn't serve Wentzfield. It goes straight out, slightly different route to Walsall. But it's certainly, the idea is to come to New Cross, and then there's the opportunity to think just how that might connect to Wentzfield as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's Wentzfield is. I think the Towns Fund, it will really bring in some important forward development there. Where am I on the questions? Sorry, there's a lot coming in. How fantastic! From Sharon, how do you see help for self-employment support for freelancers who are committed to their job?
Now, is this a question about why they haven't already been included in the furlough scheme, Sharon, or not? Because I don't mind saying, Sharon, that I have been, you know, I'm a proud Conservative. I stand on the Conservative ticket, but I have been extremely disappointed that the government haven't included freelancers in the furlough scheme, and the organisation Forgotten, which you probably know as their lobbying body. I've done public events with them. And I'm genuinely surprised, because I think it should have been possible to accommodate that. In terms of what we're trying to do here, in terms of support for SMEs, there's a number of things, depends a bit which sector you're in, but we're trying to think about, obviously, skills development for you to be able to recruit the people you need. We're trying to think about some funding packages for growing from small businesses to scale-ups. For example, if you're in the creative sector, there's been a scheme there. We're obviously trying to think about the support you've had with business rates, VAT, all of those things. And of course, we're also running some of our entrepreneur programs within our entrepreneur skills within our innovation program. So if you wanted to follow up particularly what support we are offering locally, we can either do that directly or through our growth hubs. And if you go there, that's a sort of one-stop shop for any business support. They can take you through that, the Black Country Growth Hub. But I'm not quite sure whether the question is about the forgotten bit where we've been vociferous or about local support on the ground.
I think it probably is. And as a former freelancer, I have also been passing my concerns about that up to government. I think it was the speed at which help had to be put in place. But as the pandemic's gone on for a long time, I think this is a growing concern that I share as well. A question from Noreen, again about Mhclg Police Station. How do we make sure it stays open? And it's a great concern to all residents and businesses. So
I hope people won't think this is a rather simple way of answering the question. You vote for the Conservative candidate in the Police and Crime Commissioner election. It's quite rare that there's actually a really, really clear choice on offer. Jay is your Conservative Police and Crime candidate, and I obviously supporting him, although it be his decision, not mine, are absolutely clear, as Jane has been. We need to keep frontline police stations open. I've explained to you why I think that. And of course, the Labour team have been the ones who have proposed this closure. There's absolutely no question about that. There is absolutely clear blue water on this. And of course, it does also go back to financial competence and management. The reason I'm very confident we can do this is you have to manage your budget, which is exactly what I've tried to do as mayor. We've lived within our means. We've not had any debt. We've not had any precept. And what you see from the Labour Police and Crime Commissioner is consistently increasing precepts. I think it's gone up by 9.2%, the precept on your council tax bill, if you've had them drop through your letterboxes this week. And despite all of that, there is still these proposals of closures. So there is a clear choice, Noreen, at this election.
Absolutely. Another question about the cladding and fire safety scandal. Sam asks, you will be pleased about the Mhclg opening some operations in Wolverhampton. What's the likely impact on the region of the continuing fire safety scandal? And he's concerned about the mental health of flat owners and the cost to those owners.
Well, let's be blunt, Sam. We've got some, and I've been to visit the teams in the sort of management teams in some of the blocks. I will say in Birmingham, where it's concentrated, this issue. And we've got people who are being declared bankrupt, who have got, there are some with mental health stress issues as a result of this. And that's why I firmly believe that this needs to be brought to a conclusion. And all I can say is that I've tried to work with Mhclg on this. And I don't think I'm putting words into their mouth. I think they would say I have been consistent over my support to them over this. And we've got to continue to do that. Hence, literally only today, we signed for. And there's probably another thing. You might think it's surprising I say this, having been quite sort of partisan over the police issue. I've tried to work cross-party on this as well, because I genuinely think if this is a case where if we can bring all the elected leaders of the West Midlands together to lobby government, we probably get a better outcome. So I've deliberately, and obviously the MPs in the immediate inner Birmingham seats, where most of the blocks are concentrated, the Labour MPs. So we've genuinely tried to work together with Shabana Mhclg over these issues. And I think actually that's benefited us.
Thanks, Andy. I think that you have worked brilliantly. I know we have a very mixed political council and MPs, and I think that's been one of something I've appreciated a lot. You are that central point of kind of everyone coming together, and that.
Well, as I always joke, Jane, you're all whipped by your party in Westminster, whichever party you're in. I'm not whipped by anybody. I do what I like, and I only have the loyalty to citizens here. And it is a slightly privileged political position, quite an unusual political position, actually. So I think you can act as that convener across party, actually.
No, I think that was very clear when you came to see the Chancellor with me to lobby for the West Midlands. I think that point was made very, very clearly. So thank you for all your work on cross-party things. Oh, hang on. Sorry, there are so many questions. It's now changed chat. I'm so sorry, Andy. There was a question. I remember the next one coming was about heritage buildings. It's from Sucha. What are your thoughts on listed buildings? I know Sucha's our candidate in Heathtown, and he and I visited Heathtown Bards, which I've spoken to you about in the past. I think there is a bit of a plan there, and I've been having meetings this week, and I'm having some next week about getting something finally done with the Bards. So I'm reasonably hopeful. But I think what's your main thoughts on how we prevent buildings like Heathtown Bath? It's been empty since 2003, and it is a beautiful listed building, and it does, really concern local residents that it's sitting rotting.
So this is a really interesting original question, and Sucha, thank you for the question. We're going to put something in our manifesto about this actually, which I haven't told you about. We've got a lot of buildings like this across the West Midlands. One part of the West Midlands, though, has done a brilliant job at dealing with this, and it's Coventry. And they've set up what they call a Coventry Historic Buildings Trust, I think it's called. And it actually is a body which is privately run, and the council passed ownership of some buildings to that body. And actually, that private body has done a brilliant job in winning investment for some of their buildings, and has actually now progressed a lot of them to bring them back to life. And on the eastern side of the city, where they have a huge old priory, it is actually out on the London Road. It's incredible how they're bringing that back to life. And it's taught me something. It's taught me that is a model that we could use in other parts of the West Midlands. And the guy who runs it, who's a private sector developer, I was talking to him the other day about how could we take this and apply it elsewhere. Now, to be really clear, you do need a willing council, because the councils have got to be willing to part company with assets they often can't maintain themselves. And there's a bit of reluctance from some of them, but I actually think there is clear evidence that this alternative model can work, and that's what I would be pushing for across the region.
Very pleased to hear you support that. I know Mhclg have got some proposals about community transfer of these sort of buildings, so we can really avoid places like Heathtown Bards becoming derelict. And
exactly.
I'm so in favour of maintaining our heritage. And if you have a spare moment, Andy, there's a fantastic Facebook group called Wolverhampton in Old Photographs. And I think you can see from the comments on some of our heritage that we've lost in the city, how much people care about maintaining our industrial
I'd like to see that.
And it's worth a visit. And I think, it's sad that we've lost what we have in many cases, but this is a great way to.
It's a good model. I don't claim to have originated it, but sometimes in this job you see good practice and you think, aha.
No, it's great, and it gives the community that involvement. I think that's really important. Another question from Warren: do you have any involvement in youth services? It needs more engagement after this pandemic, specifically around missed socialisation and mental health.
So, okay, great question, Warren. The straight answer is no. That is actually run by a local authority, youth services, but I would be very willing to make an observation, which is they've had huge funding cuts across the whole country. And it is very clear to me that is very challenging. You have a wonderful facility in Wolverhampton, which I've been lucky to be at a number of times. The way and what the Wolves Foundation have done for that actually gives you a slight advantage over some other places. So brilliant. What we do have responsibility for, though, and it comes slightly back to the economic question, is what we call the youth hub and the youth platform. Now, what this is all about, it's a combined authority that we put together in terms of pulling together in one place all of the resources, advice, knowledge for how young people can find new work. And we actually launched, it was last autumn, the first one of these in the West Midlands, in the Way in Wolverhampton, and it's Now, obviously, since then, the lockdown hasn't been able to be used, but it's there as a physical place. And there's also this youth platform, which draws everything together, including all the youth coaches through the DWP. So I've tried through our skills team to provide that sort of single point of contact, and we get good feedback on it, actually.
Yeah, I think that is important. And I just want to echo, I think that's so important that we do look at the mental health of young people. It's an issue that is being discussed, and we're pushing to get more people into schools, sort of helping young people. I think they've had a very, very tough time in the last 12 months. Next question is from Alex. I've got friends and colleagues who work at 2 airports locally, and their jobs are at risk. One site has no public transport, no proper sewers, no footpaths, narrow roads. The list goes on. We really need the mayor's help to protect general aviation sites. Alex, I'm wondering if you mean Wolverhampton Airport, but I'm not sure. But I think that comes in South Staff's outside your boundary. Yes,
does. Yes, Alex has just said yes in the thing. So I will freely admit I've not stepped into the debate over Wolverhampton Airport as it's in South Staffs, but I presume the other airport where you have friends is Birmingham. I hope I'm not going to be wrong about that, Alex. And he's very quick, Coventry Airport. Well, that's another debate, isn't it, Alex? And exactly what Coventry Airport choose to do, given the other potential use of that site, is actually a private debate for them, of course. But let's just say 2 more general things about aviation. Of course, it's absolutely critical that the support comes for that sector. I was banging on the Transport Secretary's door, frankly saying the lack of support to the Home Secretary when they brought in the quarantine issues last summer wasn't right as well. Pleased to see the business rates exemption they got worth 8 million to Birmingham. That's been extended further. So big sums for those regional airports. And the other key issue is, of course, the aerospace sector. And that, in a sense, is even more important to Wolverhampton, with your big companies like Collins and, of course, Mhclg in James Patch, actually. And there we've been working with the Midlands Aerospace Alliance to try to get BAEs, and the test of this is still going to come, to support that sector specifically, as it is going to take a lot longer to recover than ever some of the sectors like hospitality. However hard they've been affected, they will bounce back this summer. But what we've really been pressing is they're on a completely different lead time, those sectors. And of course, one thing that will help them is this super deduction piece around capital investment, because the way they're going to compete going forward is going to be about the efficiency of their plants. So that's very important offer. But the Midland Aerospace Alliance, brilliant lobbying for aerospace. We've been active with BAEs on that as well, and I will continue to do that because there's a lot of jobs in Wolverhampton dependent on that. Absolutely,
thanks. There's one other question about leaseholders. Can you encourage fellow Conservative colleagues to engage with the issue that is important to many of us? I think you are doing that already.
I've tried to do that, yeah. I think a lot of Conservative colleagues are a bit remote geographically remote. They understand the issues and are engaged, but thus far it seemed a city centre issue, actually. But I think the evidence tonight is fascinating to me. We've had more debate about it on this call than any previous call, so really interesting, actually. I'm
not sure everyone's in Wolverhampton, or whether people have come in from Birmingham. I know I have been engaging with one constituent and one block in Wolverhampton that did have some issues that the council have helped remediate. But I think it certainly is more a central Birmingham issue than Wolverhampton, where we have very few blocks of that height. And in North East, I have very, very few, apart from some in Heathtown. So a question from David: what benefits will the Mhclg move bring to Wolverhampton? Will there be employment opportunities for local people? And the city centre is in desperate need of footfall and improvements.
So it's a very interesting question, David. So I think in time, big benefits for Wolverhampton. Let me just explain. But the first thing to say is we've been lobbying away on this for some time. Jane knows when we had Robert Jenrick up at the Springfield Brewery last August, I think it was, we were sort of locked away talking to Robert about it on that day. So it's taken a bit of time, this campaign. And I was delighted when 3 weeks ago it was now, wasn't it, that we got it made public. So brilliant. They've been a wee bit coy about the job numbers, but I do think it's clear when you look at the small print. It's about 500 jobs for Wolverhampton. Now, the interesting thing is, initially, some of those will be transferring from London, but actually, I don't think everybody will transfer from London because that's just not how it works, is it? People have their lives, their roots settled, and they won't move. So I do expect it to mean local recruitment pretty quickly. And I think you will start to see job adverts for Mhclg jobs in Wolverhampton. I'm going to say by the end of this year, actually. Robert's really very, very keen that this should be very quick. And there will be some people who say pretty early, no, I can't transfer. And they'll probably then do something else in the civil service in London, which is fair enough. So it will mean jobs, but it means two other things. And by the way, you're right, those jobs will mean spending power in the city as well. It means, you know, it might even spur another office to be built. You never know. Because it will drive the property market. But I think it means something else long term, which is really, really, really important. It means that the brains of a whole industry is based in Wolverhampton. So if you think where we start, on the early questions, Mhclg looking at housing, we've got this whole question of the Brownfield Institute. We've got this modern methods of construction task force. We want factories around that. It begins to build a critical mass of an industry having its brains here, and that will generate more jobs in the future. We know for certain that people will gravitate around where the sort of brains are of something. So I honestly think that's why it's almost like the office relocation for civil servants will be a catalyst for something much bigger, and that's why I was so keen to get it.
Absolutely, I completely concur with that. And I think I'm so looking forward to industries moving here who want to innovate in home building, the task force in modern methods of construction. I know both you and I, Andy, have lobbied to say we want local jobs and get advertising. We will see a large number of those jobs be recruited locally, which I'm really pleased about. Andy, we're very nearly out of time. There's one final question from Simon. What can be done to get more vaccination sites in the city? Can we have Molineux as Villa Parks being used in Birmingham?
I wonder if this is the Simon whom I know, and he'll be mourning last night's result, of course. Yeah. And so the answer is quite simply this: are more sites needed in the city? I'm actually not sure they are. It's a decision of the clinical commissioning group, and I did actually discuss this directly with the woman who leads that. Wonderful woman, and what a brilliant job she's done across the Black Country. I will disguise her. I'll keep her anonymous in case you wouldn't wish to be known. But Sally, her first name, she's done a phenomenal job. And we did discuss this directly. And she said, particularly after the Old Dudley Stadium came on board, that we've actually got sufficient sites for the rate at which we get the vaccine in. The limiting factor is not the ability of the sites to administer. The limiting factor is the availability of the vaccine. So unless it has changed dramatically in the last few weeks, I don't think there is a demand for another mass vax centre that, for example, the Molineux would provide. And I'm absolutely sure as well that if they did have the demand, they'd be very quick to put in a call to somewhere like the Molineux.
I think we'd just like to go and look at the inside of Molineux and get a vaccination, because any born and bred Wolves fan appreciates every trip. I think there's an element of sentiment for Wolverhamptonians there. But it's a very interesting question. I'm looking forward to my vaccine on Friday. I know, Andy, you had yours.
I had mine on Sunday. I waited for my age group and I went to the Millennium Point, and it was incredibly well organised. I'll tell you though, Jane, prepare for it. There's no after effects, but you do know you've had it. The upper arm is just that little bit sore, that's all.
Oh, they build us tough in Wolverhampton. I'm looking forward to it. But Andy, thank you so much. Our hour is up. I feel like Fiona Bruce on question time, but it's been a great pleasure, and thank you for being so candid and for answering so many very interesting questions about the West Midlands and about Wolverhampton and about opportunities, economic recovery. We covered a lot of ground. And it's been a great pleasure.
Well, thank you very much, Jane. I always say this, I've genuinely enjoyed it, even though I'm always slightly surprised after an hour of Q&A that I have. But no, brilliant. And it is what the job's all about. So thank you very much, and good luck to everyone for what you're doing to come through this. Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.